Hi, and welcome to Jules Voto's Photo Focus. In my last video, I talked about the Nikon F2, its features, and how to use it. But I really didn't talk much about the Photomic meter finders. There's a link in the description below to that video. So the focus in this video is on the Photomic meter finders for the Nikon F2. When the Nikon F2 was introduced in 1971, it came with either the non-metered DE1 standard prism finder or the DP1 meter finder that you see here. The DP1 uses two CDSLs to give you center-weighted metering that concentrates 60% of its sensitivity in the 12 millimeter circle indicated in most of the interchangeable viewing screens for the F2. Okay, the meter is powered by either two 1.5 volt silver batteries or one 3 volt lithium battery. And they go right here in the bottom of the camera. So let me just show you how to install the battery. I'm using a Canadian nickel. It's a little softer than a US nickel and less likely to damage the battery compartment cover. Okay, so we're just going to place the battery, and this is just a single battery. It's a 3 volt battery with the plus side facing out, and then just place it in there and replace the battery compartment door. Okay, there you go. Now, to turn the meter on, you move the advance lever out to its standoff position, exposing the red dot that you see there. Okay, that brings power to the finder. There is a battery check on top, just right in front here. You just press in and you see the needle deflect to the left. That indicates the battery is good. And these batteries last quite a long time. Okay, I just want to show you how the meter gets power from the body, from the batteries in the body. So we're going to remove the finder. To remove the finder, you press in on this clamp here and turn it down. Okay, just hold it down. Then taking a pen or other object, press in on the finder release button on the back of the camera, and then tilting forward slightly, you can remove the finder. There are two contacts, one here, one there on the body. This one has like a little rubber gasket around it. This one does not. That is normal. That's the way it's supposed to be. And then the finder itself has two contacts. Might be a little hard to see, one on each side that meet up with those contacts on the body. To replace the finder, we just line it up, press down, turn the shutter speed dial so it engages with the shutter speed dial on the camera. The finder has its own shutter speed dial, but it must align with the one on the camera. Okay, the DP1 for the F2, like the FTN finder for the Nikon F, uses a semi-automatic indexing system in order to let the meter and the finder know what aperture is set on the lens. Okay, so let's remove the lens and I could show you this a little better. Okay, you will notice on the lens is a coupling prong. You'll notice all old manual focus Nikon lenses have this coupling prong, even the newer AI and AIS manual focus lenses. Okay, that coupling prong connects to a coupling pin on the finder. Okay, and by moving back and forth, it indicates to the meter what aperture is set. So let's mount that lens back on, lining up the black dot on the lens with the black dot on the body. Now once we do that, we twist to the minimum aperture, then to the maximum aperture, and that indexes the maximum aperture to the meter. And there's a window on the front. I'm just going to bring us a little closer and focus in on that so you can see it. And this is a 50 millimeter f2 lens. And I hope you could see that clearly. You could see f2 in that window. Okay, and the way the meter works is you set your ISO, ASA as it was called back then, by lifting up the ring around the shutter speed dial and setting it to the speed of the film you're going to use. Okay, so I have it set, the red arrow opposite 400. You then pull out the advance lever to expose the red dot, and the meter is on, and then using either your shutter speed dial or aperture, you center the needle in the window on top, or there's also the needle visible in the viewfinder. Okay, and if the needle is to the left of the center position, you're overexposing. If it's to the right, you're underexposing. And there's a plus and minus in the viewfinder to indicate that. This meter will read down to EV1, which would indicate an exposure of 1 second at 1.4 with a film speed of 100. Okay. Also, you will notice there is a contact on the side of the viewfinder. That is to connect to a Nikon flash, and it would give you a ready light at the top of the viewfinder. Remember always to push when you're done using the camera, make sure you push that film advance lever in so you're not draining the battery unnecessarily. So in 1973, Nikon released an additional meter finder for the F2, the DP2. And when that is mounted on the F2, the camera is known as the F2s. The DP2 provides center weighted metering, just like the DP1, again using 2 CDS cells. However, instead of centering a needle in the viewfinder, it uses LEDs. It has 2 LEDs, one with a plus on it, one with a minus. If the plus lights up, obviously you're overexposing. If the minus lights up, you're underexposing. When both light up, that indicates correct exposure. It meters lower, to a lower light level than the DP1. It'll meter down to EV-2, which would indicate an exposure of 8 seconds at 1.4 using ISO 100. So it is more sensitive. Also, and I don't have a DP2, but I'm just going to put up here for a second the DP12. All right, I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, but I just want to show you similar to this, but it does have a contact on it on the left side of the finder to connect the DS1 EE aperture control, which gives you shutter priority auto exposure. And the way it works, you take off the lens, you mount the EE, the DS1, there's also a DS2 unit to the camera. It screws into the PC socket, and you then mount the lens. And what it does, you select the shutter speed, and the camera then actually rotates the aperture to give you the correct exposure. It's very accurate, but kind of slow, okay, because it's physically moving the aperture. All right, so okay, so that was 1973. In 1976, the DP3 was released, and when that is attached to the F2, it's called the F2sb. Okay, and that one looks pretty much identical to this DP12. Okay, the only difference being the way the lens is indexed to the meter. But it also meters down to -2 EV. But the biggest change is that it uses silicon blue meter cells instead of CDS cells. They are more sensitive, respond faster to changes in light than CDS cells. They also don't have the memory of CDS cells. With CDS cells, a meter with CDS cells, if you're shooting outdoors in bright sunlight and then go indoors, the CDS cells may remember the bright light and your images may be underexposed. It doesn't last long, probably just a few minutes, but that is something to be aware of. The DP3 also uses a 5-stage LED display to indicate exposure. If the plus symbol lights up by itself, you're overexposing by more than one stop. If the minus lights up, you're underexposing by more than one stop. If the 0 in the middle and the plus lights up, you are overexposing between a fifth and a full stop. Works the same for the minus. If the center, 0 in the center, the circle in the center is lit up, that indicates correct exposure. Also with the DP3, in addition to a exposure scale in the viewfinder with those LED lights, you also have exposure indication on the top of the viewfinder. So you also have a eyepiece shutter. Purpose of the eyepiece shutter is if you're using that EE auto aperture control and your camera's up on a tripod, light getting into the viewfinder can influence the exposure. So you close the eyepiece shutter. When you do that, you then have indication on the top for exposure. So you just adjust your aperture or shutter speed until the red light comes on. That indicates correct exposure. Okay, you also have an eyepiece illuminator. Shutter speed and aperture are visible in the finder, but in dim light it's hard to see the shutter speed. You just put the camera to your eye, just move this little switch to the back, and it will light up the shutter speed. It will not light up the aperture. That is illuminated from the top of the camera, so if you have some light at the top, if you're under a light, this will provide light to show the aperture and the shutter speed in certain situations. But if it's really dark, you just move this lever back. So that was the DP3. In 1977, Nikon introduced 2 new meter finders for the Nikon F2. The DP11 that you see here and the DP12. First, let's talk about the DP11. Really, the only difference between a DP11 and the DP1 is the method by which you index the lens to the meter on the camera. Okay, you saw on the DP1 the prong on the lens mated with a pin on the camera. With the DP11, Nikon went to an auto indexing system. The old system was referred to as a semi-automatic indexing system. Okay, so the way it worked, let me just take the lens off so you can see a little better. Okay, on the lens there is a ridge. It is a little bit raised from the rest of the aperture ring, okay? That ridge mates with a feeler on the camera, this part right here. Okay, so now let's mount the lens, and it doesn't matter what aperture you have the lens set to, just match up the black dot on the lens with the black dot on the camera, and then that ridge on the lens connects with the feeler, maybe a little hard to see, connects with the feeler on the finder, and as you turn the aperture, that feeler moves, indicating to the meter what the aperture is set to. Okay, so that was really the only difference between the DP11 and the DP1. Still had CDSLs, center weighted metering with the needle in the finder and on the top, battery check in the same spot. Everything else was pretty much the same, just that indexing system. Now, what if you had an old lens? What if you had an old pre-AI lens? Okay, in order to mount that lens, you needed to move this feeler out of the way, because if not, the old lens could damage that feeler. Okay, so what you did, you could take a coin and you just kind of push it up into the finder. Okay, and now it's gone. Now you can mount that lens. To bring it back down, to mount an AI lens, there's a little switch here. You just push it towards the rewind knob and you see the feeler drop back down. Now when using those older lenses on an AI camera, a camera that took AI lenses, you needed to use the stop-down method. Okay, normally you are metering at full aperture, so your view through the viewfinder is nice and bright. However, when using these older lenses, you must use stop-down metering. Basically, after pushing that feeler up, mounting your lens, you turn on your meter, and then you must hold in the depth of field preview button as you adjust the aperture. Okay, once your exposure is set, and you could set that exposure either using your aperture or shutter speed dial, right? Once that needle is centered, you let go of the depth of field preview button and take the photo. Now those older lenses, those older non-AI lenses, lenses previous to 1977, Nikon had offered at the time a modification service for a nominal fee. I think it was like between $20 or $30 depending on the lens, and they would convert those pre-AI to AI. And just one other thing, the newer AI and AIS lenses still have the coupling prong on the lens, so they will work fine on the older cameras. Okay, so you can mount an AI lens onto a Nikon F2 with a DP1 or a DP2 or a DP3 finder with no issues at all. It will couple to the meter. Okay, so that was the Nikon F2 with the DP11, and that is referred to as a Nikon F2A, the A meaning auto indexing. And the easiest way to tell an DP1 from a DP11 is the DP11 does not have that window indicating the aperture on the front, and also has an A indicating that it is capable of auto indexing. Also in 1977, Nikon introduced the final meter finder for the F2, and that was the DP12. The DP12 is the same as the DP3, except for the fact that it takes AI lenses with that automatic indexing system. Again, the way you can tell, there's no aperture window on the front of the prism. Also, it is marked AS. One other thing with the DP3 as well as the DP12, they will meter down to 10 seconds. All right, so how do you achieve that? All right, let's suppose you're in a very dark room or outdoors at night and your aperture is down to its maximum, 1.4. Your shutter speed is at 1 second, and you still can't center the needle, or actually in this case, have that center LED lit. Okay, so you still would be underexposing at a 1 second exposure. So what you do is you turn your shutter speed dial to B. Now when you turn it to B, that indicates a 2 second exposure. If you need a longer exposure than that to light up that center LED, you press in this little button on the top of the shutter speed dial and then rotate it. And you will see you've got 4, 8, and the dot indicates 10 seconds. So let's say now that we need an exposure of 4 seconds. So that has lit up that center LED, indicating proper exposure. Okay, so remember now your shutter speed is actually set to B, as you can see here. You come around to the top of the camera and you turn the collar around the shutter release to T. You then take your self timer and you just rotate it to 4. Okay, there's a little black mark on the timer at opposite 4. Now don't press the button on the camera body for the self-timer. Okay, we don't want to use the self-timer as a normal self-timer. We're using it to time a long exposure. You then press the shutter release. Of course, at this point, you'd probably be using a cable release, but you press it, and now it will time a 4-second exposure. So it's a great feature to have, and if you do any work in real dim light, just remember to use a cable release. Okay, so that's it for the Nikon F2 meters. We looked at the DP1, the DP2, the DP3, the DP11, and finally this DP12. When the DP12 is mounted on a Nikon F2, it is known as an F2AS. Oh, one other thing, it has a coupling here for the DS12. You can see some contacts here. For a DS12 EE aperture control attachment. Okay, similar to the DS1 and the DS2 for the DP2 and 3 finders. Works the same way, it's just that the DS12 will accept AI lenses. So you need to use that with AI lenses. I've seen them on eBay for between $300 and $400, the EE aperture controls. Okay, so that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I'll be publishing a new video every Wednesday morning, so stay tuned. Thanks for watching.